Now, the Ministry of Justice is set to release a draft code of practice looking at how police should respond to low-level first-time offenders.
Yeah, the new government guidance could see shoplifters, thieves and those in possession of drugs led off from being sent to court if it's their first offence. Let's talk to the Shadow Secretary of State for Women and Equalities, Anneliese Dodds, who joins us now in the pouring rain in Westminster. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us today. Can I ask you, what do we make of this? We've got a huge backlog in the courts. It is a problem. For first-time offenders, should they get this little bit of leniency, do you think?
Well, we think that, for example, community sentences need to be used effectively. But, look, I would say, actually, this represents a huge failure for the Ministry of Justice because, as you said, there's a huge backlog in the courts, but there's also a real shortage of prison places. And actually, Labour's revealed today that using the Ministry of Justice's own figures will actually run out of places by November. Now, the Justice Secretary has actually written to judges and said, not just for crimes that aren't serious, but for serious crimes, so for example, for drug dealers, for people who've committed assaults, that actually judges should bear in mind prison overcrowding when they're setting sentences. Now, we believe that's wrong. We believe that the government needs to get a grip on this. They've allocated £4 billion almost to actually be building new prison spaces, but they've only got £1.3 billion spent so far. So Labour would get a grip on this. We would make sure that we had adequate prison spaces for the number of criminals, and of course we'd be driving down crime as well.
I wanted to talk to you about oil and gas and net zero because Labour aren't going to revoke the new wave of oil and gas licences, Rishi Sunak's new wave of them. But that is despite the Labour Party previously saying that you oppose them. So can you just outline Labour's position on that? Because it does seem quite confused.
Well, actually, it's perfectly crystal clear. We've said we will not grant new licences. We do not believe the government should be granting new licences. Now, where licences have already been created, where that legal relationship has already begun, Labour will stick to those agreements. Why? Because actually our economic trustworthiness as a country and sticking with legal commitments is incredibly important. And actually, sadly, that reputation has been really dragged through the mud by recent Conservative administrations where they've not held to international law. You know, they've actually threatened our reputation economically for holding to those economic institutions. So where licences have already been agreed, we will not go back on those. That is important legally to provide certainty, but we will not be granting new licences. And that's because granting new licences right now is going to keep people's bills high. It's going to prevent us winning that race for new jobs for our country, and it's against our country's economic interest.
Can you see why that is confusing, though? Because you won't grant new licences, but you won't revoke these new licences. So what is the point of opposing them then? Because you are accepting these new licences.
Well, we don't... With respect, I don't think it is confusing. It's about whether we would grant new licences or not. We would not be granting new licences. That's not in the interests of bill payers. It's not in the interests of our economy. But where that legal relationship has already begun, Labour is not going to be damaging that. And as I said, particularly under Liz Truss, but under other Conservative administrations as well, we've seen a huge amount of damage done to our country's economic reputation. I mean, we are concerned that under the Conservatives, we are losing that global race for the technologies of the future. Now is a time when the Conservatives should have the kind of long-term plan that Labour has for driving towards net zero in energy, to get bills down, to get those new jobs in our country, and instead they're going backwards, and really this is terrible for our economic future.
Well, how do you work that one out, in the sense that what we're told is that this is preserving jobs in Scotland, it's adding an additional 21,000, it's part of the transition to net zero, which everyone accepts we need, but it means we can produce our own oil and gas rather than import it at a higher price, and in fact, with as Grant Shapps tells us, with 4 times the carbon count involved in getting that other oil and gas. Plus, we're still keeping to net zero at 2050. He's getting £100 billion worth of investment from companies to push towards renewables and sustainables at a meeting today. How is that being economically damaging to the UK?
Well, I would look at the evidence here and what businesses have been saying, not at what Conservative politicians have been saying, because the evidence is really clear. And, you know, people will have seen this themselves with the bills that they've been paying. The fact that we have domestic production of gas, that has not kept our bills low. Why? Because gas prices are determined internationally. So we could be producing enormous amounts more or less and still have the same price because that price is set internationally. And actually for bill payers, they know this because they see what has happened to their bills recently. Now, I think the Conservatives here are just not being open and frank with people. They have been before. So actually Greg Hands, currently the Conservative chairman, he said that it was a fact that the price of gas was set internationally. So they know this is the case. And I think really they're trying to play with smoke and mirrors here. But industry itself, as well as bill payers, is not being fooled. They're not buying this. They know that the future is in renewables. It's in new nuclear, it's in green hydrogen, it's in ensuring that we have those wind power jobs, solar jobs and other jobs in new technologies. They want to see investment in those areas, and they're really frustrated with the Conservative government because they just seem to be really making up a gimmick just about every week rather than getting a grip on the long term, and that's what Labour would do.
Wanted to ask you about the Rutherglen by-election whilst we have you. Do you think Labour can take Margaret Ferrier's seat from the SNP?
I believe that we can. I think at the moment the people of Rutherglen are really being failed by not just one but 2 governments, obviously by the government, Conservative government in Westminster and by the SNP government in Holyrood. And of course they've also had a rule-breaking MP. When I was there a few months ago, certainly there was a lot of support for Labour there. There was a lot of unhappiness about the situation. And I think now the ball is really in the SNP's court. They need to agree to having a by-election so that local people can have their say.
Anneliese Dodds, really good to see you this morning. Thank you so much for standing there in the pouring rain and talking to us. You wouldn't believe it's the 2nd of August, would you?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much.